So the question is? I think an important difference that we need to sort of establish is between nationality and citizenship. Citizenship is more inclusive than nationality. Nationality has embedded an idea of your country of birth and has got an idea of blood ties or language heritage or culture that is much more close. And if you think in terms of the capacity of a nation to include people who come from outside, you will see that the people where they have a strong idea of nation and nationality, that may be more difficult for people to become part of that community. So migration and citizenship are connected as a phenomena. You cannot look at them separately, or you can look at them separately up to a point, but if you want to understand, for example, who is allowed or not to become a citizen, you need to understand how do we define citizenship first, and then we can talk about what migrants have to go through in order to be incorporated or integrated in society. How can someone start to belong to the nation is also the question we should ask. The state plays a major role because they define the criteria for incorporation, it defines the criteria for someone to acquire the citizenship when they're born or later on in their life. I'm thinking about, for example, at what has become quite common nowadays in Europe in particular, the citizenship test. So the test you have to pass in order to become a citizen of a country of Europe. I have passed the citizenship test myself recently. And it was particularly fascinating to read through it. And one of the questions which I found particularly interesting on this framing was about food and cooking. And it was basically saying, us British people love to cook and to invite people at home for dinner. As an Italian, the cooking dimension is something very close to my heart and food. And it was particularly striking because I know very well that people very much rely on Deliveroo for their survival in England. There is also something about what are the criteria of integration we need to ask. So we need to ask, what are the criteria that I need to conform to in order to be accepted? So there are decisions that have been made in terms of defining what criteria you need to fulfill in order to aspire to become part of the society there. This, in a sense, takes us back to the point about what is the nation, who belongs to the nation. So the definition about who belongs to the nation implicitly and sometimes explicitly is also defining who is not belonging or is not allowed to belong. And this is how migration and citizenship are very much part of the same relationship. If we look at contemporary society that is extremely diverse, both in terms of cultural heritage, but also in terms of what position individuals have vis-à-vis the state. So what are your rights and entitlement in a specific country? It's not only about being a citizen or not being a citizen. That is one, is important. Obviously, being a citizen gives you more security in terms of for example, not being, the state cannot deport you, just to give you an example. But there is more, because in a sense, even undocumented migrants who are not citizens of the country, they're not even legally in the country, they still have rights. If you think, for example, of the right to education, in most European countries and internationally, there is a recognition of the fact that you cannot deny the right to schooling to children in the compulsory education age. So what is the basis of their rights? It's not about citizenship. Is about something else, and it's coming from the human rights framework. It comes from the UN Convention for the Right of the Child. But there is also another source of rights in contemporary societies and cities, you can see there, and it's the rights that derive from presence, from being there. So, for example, in some places, an undocumented migrant who has been living for 10 or 20 years in a city, you may find be entitled to access social housing or getting access to welfare state or to health care, etc. So you can be a member of society, but not having all the rights and entitlement that some groups have. When we talk about defining the boundaries of a community, obviously there is a hard power, which is the one which the rules are established, the regulation, the fact you have to register to be allowed to stay, even if you have been in a country for 20 years, for example. At the same time, this is doing something of the same rules and regulations are also working on a different level, which is the fact of making people feel not welcome. And this is something that is very evident when we talk about Brexit, but also for other communities that I've been working with, in particular, for example, Roma people and undocumented migrants, or even people from ethnic minorities, in particular if they are racialized ethnic minorities. So what you see here, that some groups are more vulnerable to this change of the ideologies of belonging or politics of belonging, whatever you want to call it. They have less voice in this transformation, and they either adapt or they may be invited to leave or they may be forced to leave. In the definition of who belongs to a community, there is always an issue of power embedded into it. And power, as we know, is not a fixed or static aspect of society. So there are shifts, and there is groups that become more powerful than others, and they tend to impose new ideas about belonging. A very good example is just Brexit, if you think, all the debate around the EU referendum in UK, where you see that that's an idea of Britain in Europe has been basically lost as part of the referendum, and nowadays there is this idea of the global Britain. So there is a change of projection of what does it mean to be British. What are we trying to work on in my research and with colleagues is to think about the legacy of this 40 years of membership of Britain to the European Union in terms of how you transform people and their belonging, their family connection, and what happens when you have a major shift, a major transformation of the politics of belonging, as in the case of Brexit.